Hi, and welcome to Theme Park Academy, brought to you in partnership with blooloop. Dive into the world of themed attractions with us as we bring you the inside scoop directly from the voices that shape the industry. Let's get started. On this episode, we invite museum expert Kris Hoellen, who is the museum executive director of the B&O Railroad Museum, to talk about the next generation of museums, and she's got some incredible stories to tell us.
Hey, Kris, we're really excited to see you here today and really glad you could make it on Theme Park Academy. I know we want to talk to you about some different things than our listeners normally hear, but really want to start with you, kind of how you came to the museum and what your history is in the industry.
Great. Well, I'm the executive director at the B&O Railroad Museum, the birthplace of American railroading, where the very first stone was laid and the very first mile of commercial track. But I'm not a museum person. So I spent the majority of my career in the nonprofit space, more the service space, or what I would term traditional nonprofits, i.e. there's no gate. You're not starting with a gate. So, which I think is important to what I've brought to the museum. And over the years, I've worked for trade associations and traditional 501c3 nonprofits. And then at one point, I was recruited to come over to the National Aquarium. And I'd always been a zoo person, an aquarium person. So I came over to the aquarium, and that's when I got my destination management experience, if you will. And
Gotcha.
from there, I had a headhunter call me and say, "Oh, the director of the B&O is retiring. Would you be interested?" So, obviously I was, because here I am. And so that's how I came. So it's really been the second half of my career that's been more in the museum attraction space.
Gotcha. And, you guests go to the museum today and see, this really thought out museum that's evolved over the years. What did it actually begin life as?
So the museum began life as literally the grounds of the B&O Railroad. So when I said it literally was the first stone, first mile of the track, it was a working rail facility, and it is it's 40 acres that extends into West Baltimore. And because we have the first mile of commercial track, so we have a lot of acreage that we have, a pretty big campus for a museum, and it was working buildings, and the CSX at the time, B&O merged, ultimately became CSX today. They had the foresight in 1953 to save a lot of the collection pieces, and they created a corporate transportation museum. So its first part of life was a corporate museum, and then in 1990 it became its own, spun off independent 501c3 museum. So the museum came into existence in 1990.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the collection, I guess, whether it's a rail museum or other museums, the collection itself, why is it important in history or rail history?
Our collection, I think, is hugely important. We have over 200 pieces of rolling stock. Our collection is also big. We do not have small things. We do, but we have a lot of big things.
Yeah.
We have over 200 pieces of rolling stock, but each of our buildings are historically important as well. We have the beautiful 1884 roundhouse. We have the Mount Clair station, which was the very first train station in the country. It is also an Underground Railroad Network to Freedom site. Every piece of equipment on our property, every collection piece, every building is connected to a person, place, or event in American history. So we say now that we tell the story of America through the lens of the railroad.
It makes a lot of sense. And in addition to the collection, I think, why Mark and I want to have you on today is because when I look at the museum, you guys do so many other, the core is the collection, obviously. But in terms of whether you want to call it driving business or community engagement, you do a lot of different things than I see a lot of museums or amusement parks or themed attractions do. Could you talk a little bit first, I guess, about that workforce program you have and how it developed and what it is?
Sure. So, as I said, I came from more the traditional nonprofit space. And we at the museum, we have 40 acres, extends into Southwest Baltimore, and West Baltimore. So the communities become more and more challenged. And I don't think that you can take up that amount of space, even if you were there first, without looking at what's going on around you.
Hmm.
And one of the issues is underemployment. A lot of people are underemployed. And so we looked at it and said, all right, what can we do? We adopted the mantra of, while we're not a community center, we're striving to be the center of our community.
I
And
love
so
that.
in that case, yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, we looked and we said, we could use our campus as a school. And we started partnering with the Community College of Baltimore County, which is the largest trade school in Maryland. And we now have a workforce development program with them where students underemployed, over 18-year-olds, come onto our campus and they learn in 3 tracks: construction, rail operations, because we have a working rail line, and then
Hmm.
facilities maintenance, because we have 8 buildings, most of which are historic. And so there's usually a lot of things that need to be done. So what they do is CCBC provides expert instruction. We provide the projects and the space. So they're working on real projects. It's not theoretical. They
Hmm.
can show employers what they did. They get certifications. And then we find, using our connections, people for them to interview with. And we have an 85% employment rate, which is great. And the goal is
Well,
to get people into family wage living jobs. But I think the key on this one is partnering. Like, we couldn't do this by ourselves. We
Hmm.
partner with the Community College of Baltimore County. So, and having come from the nonprofit space, you always partner. I
Hmm.
don't think that was true for the museum or destination space.
You've taken, I think, a different approach on food and beverage also. Can you talk a little bit about how you've arranged that at the B&O?
The food and beverage is another workforce development program that we have on our campus. And it came about because we have a cafe, just like most places do, and we have the same problem most places do. You have to be, usually your cafe, as you guys know better than me, if it's either an incredibly busy place or it has the ability to have outsiders come in as well, then you can get a better vendor. But
Hmm.
uh, we don't have that. It's in our campus, so you have to come through our campus. And we wanted to have good food for our folks. And we already had our one workforce development program. So reached out to the Franciscan Center. And the Franciscan Center works with people that have been homeless and are transitioning, and they have a culinary workforce program. So I said to them, look, if you want to operate our cafe, we will give it to you for free. You don't have to pay any rent, and you get to keep all your profits. You don't have to provide us any profit sharing, but you provide good food to our guests. So it's food with a purpose. So now we have
Hmm.
2 workforce development programs on our campus. And then
Hmm.
we're also using the Franciscan Center for a lot of our catering. So it's not just food for our guests, but also teaching them how to cater events. And I'll tell you, just this past week, the CEO of CSX, so a Fortune 500 CEO, was on our property, and he had lunch, and we had the Franciscan Center, the students, cater his lunch.
That's awesome. That's
It
awesome.
was awesome.
brilliant.
And it's such a unique way, I think, that so often in the past, whether it's attractions, whether it's an aquarium, museum, amusement park, your immediate neighbors are the people who you battle with. And I feel like
Mhm.
you and the museum have done a really good job, especially since COVID, really flipping that on its head and doing a lot of more community engagement and bringing them into the process.
We have really been trying, and hence our mantra of, while we're not a community center, we're striving to be the center of our community. I mean, we have put out, and we hear from people all the time, you've changed. You aren't just a fortress in the middle of West Baltimore, but you are an open place. So we have, obviously, community access days. We also are part of Museums for All, so you can come into our museum. I think it's like $3 for 6 people. But as I always say to our front desk, just let people in if they're, if they can show you a SNAP or an EBT card. We're not going to
Hmm.
argue over $1 or 50 cents. We want to be welcoming to everybody.
Hmm.
So we have done that, but we've also looked, as I said, what's our asset? I think every institution that's going to do community engagement needs to look at what's your asset. Our asset in terms of community engagement is space. We have a lot of space. So we can host other nonprofits on our site or create these workforce programs if that's what's needed. And we have a lot of programs along those lines. So it was space. I think people need to look at their asset.
That's a really good point. And in addition to kind of guest engagement, I've seen a lot of sensory awareness and bringing that into the museum design. How has the museum done that, and what really spurred that decision?
We learned in 2019 that trains are frequently a passion for children on the autism spectrum because the trains are predictable and structured. And what we were taught by some of the experts in the autism world is that when something's a passion, that's how you can teach the child math or history or whatever the topic may be. You do it through the passion. And, so you make everything about a train analogy, and then they learn. And so when you hear that and you say, all right, we are a huge museum.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to break anything. We need to really help in this way. Again, it was the whole focus of flipping our role from not just a museum, because the museum was incredibly important, but how do we help our community by providing a space for autism? So the program has grown. We have sensory days. We have most of our events now are able to be sensory accommodated, but we also offer a free sensory summer camp. And this one I think is really heartwarming. We started with 1 week. It was oversubscribed. We then went to 2. We're now up to 4 weeks, and we hope to expand it as well. But that's where most of the parents tell us their kids have never been to camp before because there either aren't camps for sensory or they're too cost prohibitive, and ours is for free. And so we have wonderful donors that are helping to support these camps.
It's incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you see the parents so excited, yeah.
No, and I think it's something that parents have to be super happy because it's something I think every parent wants more than anything, whoever their kid is, just to be able to participate and have fun. And it really feels like historically there hasn't been that opportunity for kids. So it's really awesome. The museum has really not only opened its doors to it, but made it kind of one of your purposes is really engaging that audience.
100%. I mean, we also have, we partner with some of the disability groups that bring volunteers into our museum because it's like an outing, it's something to do. So however we can, our viewpoint is we can't always anticipate what's going to benefit the community, but we try to put out the signal that we're open. And if you think we can help, approach us. And we're very open to the conversation. Sometimes we can do it, sometimes we can't. But the fact that people realize we are open is really heartwarming.
And I think a lot of people, in the museum world, especially those of us on the outside of it, sort of looking in, they may not understand that like you do more than the collections. You have the collection and the community engagement, but the museum also does a lot of things, some known like Thomas. But could you talk a little bit how events play into marketing, cash flow, and how that makes a difference for what the museum's goals are?
So exactly. So we have huge locomotives, huge cars. And so if you come into our roundhouse, the William Mason is located in Bay 9. The William Mason was the locomotive that pulled President-elect Lincoln when he was under threat of assassination to his election. They snuck him through Baltimore at night, and that was the locomotive that pulled him. Well, you hear that once and you're like, wow, this is amazing. But you're going to come back next year and it's going to be in Bay 9. You're going to probably come back in 10 years and it's going to be in Bay 9. Like, we don't have live animals swimming around and, so we looked at it and said, okay, we want people to come continuously. But our collection, we're not changing out our collection. We do temporary exhibits, but in general, we have a very big collection. So in terms of size. So we formed an interdisciplinary committee of our staff and said, let's look at the various audiences. What's going to appeal to them? How can we create events so that we have almost something every week, or certainly every other week, that will appeal to different audiences using our collection? So that's our process. And it was all due to the fact that we don't want to be a one and done. I mean, obviously the rail fans come to the museum.
Right.
Because we are the birthplace. And so we do have visitors from all 50 states and typically 40 countries every year. But we want the local people to continue to come back. And that's where we really started looking at the events and the audience segmentation for those events. And I think we're getting better at it.
No, definitely. I've been really impressed because you've got some, highly marketable ones like obviously Thomas and at Christmas time. But then you also do a lot of other things, like it seems like dinner theaters and other things too, to bring local guests in. So you really hit a lot of different demographics in the approach.
We do. So we have Tales on the Rails. That's the one time of year you can ride the train with your dog. So that's for our dog lovers. We did a Mother's Day tea, in the Roundhouse, which was a beautiful tea. We do one of my favorites is we do a First Responders Day in September because it's really in our lane of railroad education where we actually take a locomotive and we demonstrate it hitting a car on the tracks. And our locomotive's only going 10 miles an hour with no freight, but it still smashes that car. So it's cool. It's interesting to see. First responders from varying fire departments come and actually do the extraction. And so it's good practice for them because it's an actual car that's just been hit. So again, that's another partnership. I guess I'm really trying to push the partnership because that's what I didn't see before and don't always see. And you can't be successful at community engagement without partnering. So but that one I really enjoy because it's fun to watch, but it also gets people to realize that, if you come to a crossing, don't try to beat the train. It's not worth it. You won't win.
There's no good outcome there.
No, there's no good outcome.
It's incredible how you've managed. Obviously, you've got the incredible collection, but how you're managing to even just health and safety information, you're passing that along in such a fantastic way. I'd love to hear more about the collection itself. Can you tell us a couple of examples of some really important historical parts of the collection?
Sure. So we have in our roundhouse, our beautiful roundhouse, we have the first 100 years of American railroading. So I've already told you about the William Mason that pulled President-elect Lincoln, but we also have like the Mignon, which is the number 57, and it's under easement because it's the last remaining locomotive that saw combat during the Civil War. The Civil War came by train. I didn't learn about it that way in school. I learned about soldiers and, in snow and traipsing through, which I'm sure they were too, but the train was instrumental to the railroad, and the B&O was known as Lincoln's Railroad. So we have the first 100 years. We have the second 100 years in our North Car Shop, where we have things like the 51, the first streamlined diesel electric engine, and it was built in 1937. It's got a sloping nose, very streamlined. And that's because what was happening in the 30s, the airline industry was just starting. So they were competing. So you learn, how did the railroad shape, American society socially, culturally, economically. And one of the things we've really been striving to do over the last several years is, when I came on board, we really focused on our collection from the technological side, like, the boiler from horizontal to vertical, and, look at the wheel size, and which is all incredibly important, but that's not accessible to most people. Most people, it's like they hear it, they don't want to go much further than that. But rail fans love that. And so that's great. That audience segment, they're coming. But they want to hear, most people want to hear about what was happening in society, or that a president wrote it, or, African-American history. So we really now focus on the stories behind this equipment. And so now you see people coming in and they're excited. And, the whole African-American journey from slavery to civil rights is told in our museum, because you cannot separate that journey from the railroad. They're completely intertwined. And I think there's a lot of stories like that we tell, and people it's resonating with people.
That's incredible. And I think talking about how to kind of tell stories and some of the exhibits and exhibitions that you've got on site. Obviously, you've got the Underground Railroad, which we mentioned already. Can you tell us about how you integrate these historical exhibits into a trainee-orientated museum?
Right. So we have our Underground Railroad exhibit actually in our Mount Clair station, which was, as I said before, the very first train station in the country. And that is also the location where the freedom seekers stood. That's where they were. And so when you realize, okay, you're on truly hollow grounds, but we could tell the story of the freedom seekers, but we do, but the primary role of that exhibit is to focus on the role of the physical railroad in the Underground Railroad. And that's a story not often told. And in fact, when you're in school, you expressly learn. Now, remember, students, the Underground Railroad was not an actual railroad.
Mhm.
But you know what it was? In many parts, freedom seekers, you learn about them as on foot, undercover at night. But the reality is they were on the railroads, they were on the steamboats, they were on the carriages. And the rails carried a lot of freedom seekers. And the B&O Railroad did not enforce against freedom seekers, but we tell that whole story. So we're still talking about the railroad, but we're talking about the people that were there. And then you're standing, and then we show the routes of transportation that they took. So we try to take, when we're talking about people or stories, we try to show the connection to the railroad. So another example is we just redid our segregation car. We have a combined segregation car that people can go in and see how, there's a white section only and what the segregation looked like. But the stories we're telling in there are about the railroad. For example, everybody knows the story. Usually, if you say Plessy versus Ferguson, most people will say, oh, yeah, that created separate but equal. That was the seminal case that created it and upheld it. But most people don't know what the case was about. The case was about the Louisiana Railroad. So we tell the story of how the Louisiana Railroad actually knew Homer Plessy was going to bring this case. They wanted him to bring the case, not because they were so forward progressive thinking,
Right.
because having segregation on the rails meant that they had to have more cars, more staff. It was a business decision. They wanted everybody together. But so we try to share these important stories, but from the railroad perspective, or how the railroad came in, affected the story.
Hmm.
So that's the approach we've been taking. So all our segregation stories, for example, are ones where we're talking about, wow, did you know the very first stand of resistance that's been documented was, Rosa Parks was like 1954. Over 100 years earlier was 1841 with Frederick Douglass on the Eastern Massachusetts railways. So everything comes back to the railroad. And that's
That's
how we tell
fantastic.
these stories.
I love it. That's brilliant. And I believe that you do behind the scenes tours and behind the scenes experiences on site. I'd love to hear about the behind the scenes parts that you do.
We do have behind the scenes experiences. So we take people into our archives, we take them into our restoration facility where we do all our restoration work. We take them, they can have cab rides. So they do get behind the scenes opportunities at the museum. And I think everybody loves behind the scenes because you're getting access that somebody else doesn't have. So everybody likes that. But also, it is somewhat of a revenue producer. It's not a huge revenue producer, but I think it's an opportunity to treat people very like VIPs. They can see behind. Since this is about amusements and museums, it moves them quickly into becoming members or donors, and going along that continuum as well. So that's something that we see, and I think it's really important. And they walk away usually with a good experience. But one of the things we are doing is trying to make more and more of our collection more accessible in terms of access. So, it's accessible in terms of stories, but now accessible in terms of access, because we have a lot of pieces where, you walk around them but you don't get on them or in them. And so what we started last year that became very successful was once a month, we call it B&O Unlocked, and we're doing it again for a second year with different collection pieces. But once a month, we open up a particular collection piece, car, that you normally can walk around and take pictures of and learn about, but you're not getting in or on, and we open it up for you to go inside, whatever, and so people, and it's only that day, and people love it. And so each month it's a different collection piece that you're able, and part of it is because obviously you want to maintain the integrity and quality of the piece. And so our curators are with them, but our curators are there, they're explaining the piece, and you're in it and you're on it and you're seeing something that you don't normally get to see because it's normally closed. So we're doing that again this year, and we have found that the goal is to try to give as much access to our collection as we can.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I think I don't know, I'm speaking for Adam as well, but whenever I see anything behind the scenes, I love doing them as well, because you just get that stronger connection with the piece as well. So if it is a collection piece, you get that such a strong emotional bond with it as well. And have you seen that? I know you mentioned about the revenue and reach that kind of increases. Have you seen kind of direct influence on your guest numbers when that happens, or any visitor numbers that have kind of increased on those experiences?
So revenue in terms of behind the scenes, a little, I will say for us, it's not huge. I don't think, it's not a huge source, but we do see though, we purposely made our open access days to the collections, the B&O Unlocked. We made it on a Wednesday and a Saturday. Saturdays are obviously our biggest days, traffic flowing through the museum, and Wednesdays, particularly when it's during the school year, not as much. But we're seeing that Wednesdays are picking up. The numbers have increased on Wednesdays because those are the days that the collection piece for that month is open and for them to come in. So there's a correlation from that perspective as well.
Brilliant. And I'm not going to take your thunder now, but I believe that this week was a very big week for the museum, and you had some really big news to share. Can you share with the audience the plans for the museum?
Yes. So this was a big week for us. In 2027, the railroad, the American Railroad, turns 200 years old. It was chartered on February 28th, 1827. So our North Star at the museum is 2027. Everything we do and I think that's important to always have sort of a North Star of where you're trying to head. It is related to 2027, and we want it to be a national, not just a local, but a national celebration, because the railroad was only formed 50 years after the country was formed. So there's almost no element of society. You think of your pension plans, labor policies, Mother's Day, like there's almost nothing. Time zones came from the railroad that it doesn't affect. So we hope it's be a big celebration. But for us, we want to prepare our campus as well for 2027. And we have one of our buildings that's not open for the public is the South Car Works building, which is the oldest continuously operating railroad repair facility in the country. So it was 1869 to 1990 when CSX ultimately pulled out. So that building is 33,000 square feet. It's got street access, and it's got our huge back parking lot behind it, which is over 3 acres of parking lot. So we have our back of house. Basically it's back of house railroad right now. And behind it is Southwest Baltimore, and which has not had any investment. It's been an area that has been underinvested in by many, many people for decades and decades. So, and we have our back to it. We could restore the building and not turn our entrance. But then our board and we thought about it and said, but then what are we doing for the community? If we're trying to help the community, we should restore this building and turn our entrance and make our back parking lot our front parking lot, and vice versa. So we decided to do that. And I think that's a major change for an institution, because I don't care whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, most of us, if there's something that's not quite pleasant or, a challenged area, most of us just say, oh, just keep walking, there's nothing to see here. Well, we're turning to embrace it. And that's part of our community focus. So when we restore the building, we're going to build a huge community amphitheater, which will be known as the CSX Bicentennial Garden. They're our lead corporate gift. But this amphitheater will be free space for the community. So it's placemaking, it's beautification, it's providing vibrant green space for the community to use for movie nights, food truck festivals, just to have a place to eat. And then you come inside the building, and that will be our new entrance. And we'll have our archives on view for the first time. And we have over 30 million documents. And then we're going to create and put classrooms.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kris. I want our listeners just to process that, because you gloss over it because you say the numbers so much. But think of that, 30 million historical paper documents in one place. And we, as a museum, we've never been able to show them really. And now this is really game changing, I think.
Phenomenal.
And you know what? You think about it. There are letters from, President Lincoln to the president of the B&O. There are every board of directors minute from the very first one forward. I mean, there is so much there that nobody has had an opportunity to see because they're not on public view. So we are excited, and we're placing the 2 classrooms right next to the archives so kids can learn how to use original source material. And then on the top floor, we're creating a huge innovation hall, which will focus on the present and future of American railroading, which is a whole nother discussion, because that obviously won't be B&O, right? That's the present and future. So, that's a whole nother thing too of, expanding your collection in a very different way. But anyways, we did the groundbreaking. That was a long-winded answer to say we did the groundbreaking this past week. We've gotten to the point. It's a $38 million campaign. We've raised 25 million so far. So we've gotten to the point where we could start the groundbreaking and continue the fundraising so that we are done with the building by 2027, which is, again, the goals.
Yeah.
So yes, we reached the milestone of the groundbreaking this past week. So I hope you see in that there's some of the themes that I was talking about with the partnerships and the community. And the community has contributed $1 million to the campaign. And they are actually considering a second. They did it through the South Baltimore Gateway. They program the casino funding that each community gets. So the board is comprised of residents. So it's a nice community endorsement. And back there, where it's back a house, it's like a fortress. It's a huge retaining wall. And literally the wall is coming down to create the amphitheater.
It must be so rewarding, the effort and love and that you've all put into the community that's being shown back to you now with her. It must be such a rewarding feeling.
It is a great feeling, to work with the community, because obviously if they take ownership of the space, then it increases attendance, it increases civic pride. Everybody should be happy. I mean, there's so many benefits that come from it. And I think that's something that museums are, to have a social license to operate in the future. You really, and the same thing for amusements, you really you can't just pretend that you sit there and what's going on around you doesn't affect you, or you don't have a responsibility for.
No, that's a great point. That's a really good point. And I think so often, at least on the attraction side, sometimes we forget that. But I've been really impressed just watching how, the museum is literally and figuratively pivoting to the community. And I think a lot of other attractions could learn a lot from that approach.
Yeah. Thank you. I do too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kris. Our last part is what we call our fast pass round. So we're just going to ask you a few questions about some attractions and just let us know your thoughts. And only caveat is your answer cannot be the B&O for any of the favorites. So we'll start off with, what is your favorite museum that you visited?
One of my favorite museums is, I'm going to stay local. So I'm going to say AVAM, the American Visionary Arts Museum. And it's because it uses art. It's people that all over that make art. They are not professional artists, if you will. Sometimes they come from mental challenges, whatever it may be, and it's art. But the other reason is because when they do exhibits, they tell the story, whether it's about climate change or the Holocaust, whatever it is, they tell the full story with the art. And I really like that fact that I learn the full story when I go over there.
Very cool.
That's fantastic. And aside from museums, what is your favorite attraction that you've ever visited?
Well, I won't say ever visited. I will just say favorite attraction currently would probably be, I'll say this, Mother's Day was just recently. So I made my young adult children go with me and pretend to enjoy, because it was my day, Longwood Gardens right outside of Philadelphia. I happen to really like Longwood Gardens, so that's where we went. And it's a really well run, it's a beautifully maintained gardens, and it's really well run.
Was that from the DuPont family back in the day?
It was, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's, for those who haven't been, it's really an amazing space that, you know, same thing when I first heard about it, I'm like, can really an old garden be that pretty? But it is an amazing piece of architecture outside of Philadelphia.
It is, and if you go during the holidays or when they also do things like light shows, you know, different types of activities throughout times of the year to make so that you come back, and they do a nice job.
And our last question
And I'm sorry I didn't pick roller coaster.
All good, all good, all
Oh,
good.
good. Oh, fine.
I do like them. I do like them.
Most of our guests do, so it's great to have a different answer for once. So not a problem. And I think our last question is sort of a big picture one. You know, I think a lot of us saw through COVID when that happened, so many funding sources dried up, and it was a very different world when we came out of it, literally and figuratively. And the museums have had to change a lot since then. So, but standing here today, you know, if we're to look 5 or 10 years in the future, what do you think kind of a key big trend or change that we'll have seen in the museum industry in that time, whether it's technology or other things that you see as something that is really on the cusp of happening?
Well, I think you're right. Coming out of COVID, people realized they had to be diversified. If you were not a diversified museum, you were one of the ones that didn't make it. And we are fortunate to be diversified. And by doing a lot of the community work that we do, it helps us become more diversified and supported as well. But you know, something, I don't know if this is a big trend per se, but besides the community we've talked about, I would say just also the learning styles. I don't think that we still really embrace universal learning in the museum space. You know, just we're all trying to obviously get away from, you know, books on the wall and what have you, but you're going to have, you know, whether it's a book or a small book, you're going to have some written text. How is that written? Is it written for somebody who's dyslexic? How are we, you know, we do for the hearing impaired and the blind, but I just wonder still with the universal learning if we're really addressing that. And even when people use technology, are we still really addressing the different learning styles? I mean, we are to an extent, but I think there are some areas that at least for us are gaps.
I love that. I love that. It's a really different thing for Mark and I to think about coming from our world too. Because, you know, I think in the amusement parks, we've definitely seen a move toward inclusion on definitely accessibility and sensory, but that's really interesting to think about. People might digest that information in very different ways.
Right. So that's what I think.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Kris, for joining us today. Before we let you go, can you let everybody know where they can find the B&O on the web, website, social media, all that?
We are at borail.org, so www.borail.org. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, so definitely come see us, come learn about the groundbreaking, and come visit the American railroading birthplace.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
As always, you can find Mark on LinkedIn at Mark Lofthouse, myself on Instagram at Roller Coaster Sales Guy. And to finish it, just want to say always thank you to our partners at blooloop for hosting us and allowing us to do conversations like this with Kris today. blooloop.com, at blooloop on their socials. And we'll see everybody next month. Thanks so much.